Hi there, everyone. Welcome to the Class E Podcast. I'm your host, Mary Sturgill. This is the podcast that's brought to you through a partnership between the Hill Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship here at Furman University and the Communication Studies Department. We have a special treat for you podcast listeners and an audience because we're taping live here on Furman University campus. Audience, let our listeners know you're here. Ford is an inaugural member of Furman's Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship's Leadership Council, and in 2020, he was the Summer Business Boot Camp keynote speaker. Ford is the founder and CEO of Zingle, Inc., which is an enterprise text and messaging platform that allows users to communicate with businesses, primarily hotels, for real-time customer service. In September 2019, Zingle was acquired by Medallia for approximately $42 million. Let's give a big round of applause for our guest, Ford Blakely. Let's back up a little bit and talk a little bit about your childhood, because you come from a family of entrepreneurs. How did that influence you?
You know, my mom did a podcast, because I think everyone says, you know, your sister's successful. I think after I sold the company, I was like, what was the secret sauce? And I think it was really cool because I think the secret sauce was there was not a lot of structure. You know, I've got two girls, and we live in California where everything feels like so rehearsed and coordinated. You got to take your kid to this, you got to take your kid to that. But our parents let us be bored, and we had to go kind of solve our own boredom. And, you know, my sister started companies in the neighborhood. I started things with my friends, and I think it was like a quick evolution to like that quiet space where you can evolve that and listen to that and grow. So it was good. I mean, we grew up in a great environment, very loving parents that gave us the encouragement, taught us to fail. And I think there's a lot of words out there that failure is a bad thing. My sister and I both kind of high five when we fail, because it teaches you that sort of that toughness to keep plowing through it. And I think we both thought about what are our strengths and what do we want to do. I don't think my sister or I, either one of us thought about we were going to become entrepreneurs. That wasn't really a word. You know, it was either going to become a lawyer or a doctor, or there was the other. And the other was always the kind of the big black hole of what that's going to become. So her strength was in sales and marketing. My strength was in accounting and being analytical. And I think we both kind of found our entrepreneur path in two different directions, you know. I always say, like, as an entrepreneur, you have to have a problem. Her problem was how her backside looked in pants.
Isn't that everybody's?
Yeah, and my problem was I hated to wait. So
right.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. So you both solved those problems. Is there anything from your childhood that you remember, maybe your first entrepreneurial experience?
I do. I'm sure if we were to kind of take a index from the room, I mean, how many of you felt like you had a good idea as a kid, but you were a kid and you never really acted on it? I'm sure it's probably the sky's the limit. So my big sort of aha moment was I was 11 years old. And I talked to some of the groups earlier, but my whole thing was I was a kid that loved shortcuts. And shortcuts are really now in today's world about like modern conveniences and how do you improve products. And my whole thing was I hated traveling with my toothbrush and toothpaste. It was messy. My sister and I shared a bathroom, and her crap was everywhere. Right. And my side of the sink was always neat and organized. And I remember thinking to myself going, I really want to like combine the toothbrush with the toothpaste. It sounds so simple, but as an 11-year-old kid. And I had somebody in my community said, Ford, if it's such a good idea, somebody would have already done it. So I kind of tabled it. And then 3 years later, I saw that exact product being sold at Walgreens. Right. I was like, crap, that's never going to happen to me again. So a big lesson learned is, you know, don't be influenced by the communities and people that push back on you. Like if you have conviction for what you want, I don't care if you're 50 years old or 11 years old. If you got the will to solve it, you can solve it. So that was my big moment. And so I realized early that I was a problem solver, and it manifested itself in different ways. Yeah, so that's kind of how I got started. I kept an invention book of ideas after that toothbrush that just continued to kind of evolve.
I love that, and I think the students, especially in this room, need to, if they're not already doing that, they need to do that. And maybe even some of our listeners at home. My cousin is an innovator and an entrepreneur as well, and she does the exact same thing. She keeps a book of it's a sketchbook of all of her ideas. Yeah. Right.
I call it my problem journal.
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
And the fun fact about me was I didn't realize in college, but I was a dyslexic. So reading, I was always told, to go read, and I was like, this is really hard for me, but I loved solving problems. So when I was in my career post-college, I started off as in accounting, worked for a big 5 accounting firm, and then I evolved into investment banking. Right. I was decent at what I did, but I didn't love what I did. Right. And so I started this problem journal, and rather than reading at night, I would take inventory of what pissed me off during the day. And I'd say, all right, this is the problem I had. Right. And it was fun for me. I would sort of, instead of a crossword puzzle, I would come up with different ways to solve that, sketch stuff out, think about how to go do it. And over the course of my time, I had developed 3 composition books of crazy, wacky ideas. Oh, wow, yeah. And I got to the pinnacle of my career where this accounting finance firm said, we want to make you a partner. And I went home and bought a $40 bottle of wine, as you guys know, and my wife says, you can't take that, which is hard. I had a newborn child, and it felt like the trajectory was pretty simple in front of me. Take the job, take the money. Right. And she says, you've got 3 books of ideas of stuff that's going to piss you off, and I can't handle you keep writing in these books for the next 10 years. So she said, jump into one of these pages in the sketchbook and take it to market.
That's huge, because a lot of times the people around us are kind of naysayers instead of supporters. They're like, oh, well, that's going to be too tough to do, right? Yeah. So that's amazing that you had that. I want to back up just a little bit from that and talk about your journey through Furman. Why Furman?
I chose Furman because of the Japanese program that was here. I don't know if the Japanese program was still here, but I graduated high school in '93, and Japan was a superpower. I believed in international business. And I was a foreign exchange student in high school. I lived in Tokyo. And I wanted to go to a small school that could sort of instill confidence in me and still give me the opportunity, but it was one of the few small schools that offered this sort of international perspective. And it was great. So it was a great fit for that, and jumped into here. And at the time, the economy in Japan sort of cratered, and it didn't become sort of the superpower that it was. I said I should have done Mandarin. But yeah, it was a great choice for me. I had gone from both a big public high school and a small private high school, and so I kind of got to see the yin and the yang in terms of how it would bring out the confidence in me. Yeah. And so it was good.
How did Furman set you up for becoming an entrepreneur?
I would say that I wish that Furman had all the elements that it has now. Right. And Chris, you may know this too, but I think Furman wasn't very pro-entrepreneur when I was here. And I think about the opportunities that the school is providing now, and I'm like, man, I would love to become here, because what it provided me was, again, that small environment where you could stand out and have a voice and be sort of part of something. Right. And by trade, I'm a big natural introvert. If you say you go to a cocktail party, I shy away from the cocktail parties. Like I'm shy and don't like to do that. So Furman kind of helped me on a micro level find the structure, start to speak up in classrooms, start to take on roles in clubs that instilled that confidence. So that'd probably be the number one thing. The second thing, which some of the professors aren't here right now anymore, right, Rusty? None of the accounting people, but school was hard. Like I studied my tail off. Like I would spend hours at the Duke Library because school didn't come easy to me. Right. So it's kind of a second big effect is I think what I got was I learned the art of preparation. Yes. I learned how to work hard. I learned how, I had fraternity brothers that could study for an hour before a test. That wasn't me, and it sucked. I wanted to be out doing different things. You
were diagnosed with your dyslexia as a college student?
No, there wasn't really a main thing. So I didn't realize that I had all those struggles. I just realized it took me longer to comprehend information. And so for me to have that competitive advantage, I felt like, okay, I'm just going to have to prepare harder than everybody else. So that became, I think, a really big building platform for me, because I think there's a lot of myths out there about entrepreneurs. It just comes fast and easy, but I think it really takes the hard work of preparation to sort of instill that amount of work and that resilience to not give up.
And that failure too, and that recognition. I tell my students this all the time about the failures. The failures are all those opportunities to improve.
Correct.
on what you're doing. The other thing that I tell my students is that the writing and the speaking that you're learning here will help you no matter, especially in a comm major, but all majors have to do this, right? Will help you no matter what you do.
Yeah, the smallness, we talked about the nimbleness of it too, but just the ability to adapt and test things and try things. It's a nice, good, safe environment where you can develop relationships with your professors, develop relationships, so that's good.
So you were an accounting major, and you worked for an accounting firm, worked your way up, made it to partner, and then what happened after that?
I came home with the offer for the partnership, and I said no to it, which that was the scary part. Yes. And I remember going to this firm and saying, I'm going to leave the firm, and where are you going to go? Are you going to Goldman Sachs? Are you going to JP Morgan? And I said, no, I'm going to a company called Zingle. And they all started laughing. They're like, what the hell is Zingle? Yeah. And so I jumped straight from that to starting the company. And I think there's a lot of questions people come up, like, do you start a company while you're already doing something? Do you jump off the plank and go do it? I have two different forms of advice. I think if you've got a job and a career that allows you to keep that balance and security, where you can develop and ideate, do that. I was in a place where I had to jump off. And I was charging hourly rates. I felt like I couldn't steal time away from what my focus was. And again, because I was a natural introvert, I probably would have found 20 reasons not to go do this. Right. And so the fact that I jumped off the plank and had to learn to swim.
You jumped into the deep end of the pool.
Big time. I mean, I had no background in technology.
Yeah.
I had no background in software.
So you had this idea with no background in technology and no background in software. How did you pull this off?
Just grit. One of the things that I preach is I think what you don't know can be your biggest strength. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are reluctant to get into a field or profession they don't know. But I think as you think about what the definition of entrepreneurism is, like thinking about things differently. If you do things the way everybody already does them, then you're not figuring out how to stand out. Right. And so I think the fact that I didn't have a background in technology allowed me to bootstrap the company and use a mechanism. I actually flew to Hong Kong and got these devices and got this group in Israel to ship me GSM radios, and I literally learned how to solder these GSM radios on these printer circuit boards and brought this to market. Oh, wow. When everybody in the tech space said, oh, go raise a bunch of money, let's get you a bunch of engineers, let's go figure out what that was. Mm-hmm. And I would have followed that same script. I would have burned through all my money and probably would not have had a success. So I bootstrapped the company, allowed me to have the staying power to kind of weather the times. I met another entrepreneur through the Greenville Starts that started a SMS marketing company. He said, I think I was ahead of my time. And he was. SMS was not a fluid form of communication in 2008 to 2014. People thought I was crazy.
What did people tell you when you told them what Zingle was? Did they say, why can't they just pick up the telephone?
Yeah. Yeah. And I said, who wants to pick up the phone anymore? Right? Like I made phone my competitor. Right? That's really what it was. I said, who do you compete with? I go, AT&T. Who do you compete with? I'm like, that telephone? Yeah, so it was tough. It was tough on SMS. It was the phone at the time. The iPhone had just come out, and there was a gazillion different apps that started. Mm-hmm. So app this, app that. And again, I was a student for convenience and felt like, why do I need to create another app when the most used app is your SMS app on your phone? And it's seamless, it's easy, you don't have to register, you can kind of get what you do. But the thing that I think about now, you think about SMS is pervasive in all of our lives, from to Uber, to Amazon, to whatever it is. When you're starting off in a new vertical, you got to kind of really hone in on a very specific use case. Mm-hmm. And my first vertical was in coffee in the food service space, because it was a very easy connection point to show if you allow people to text in their orders, you're gonna make more money. Very easy ROI to sell. And I'd go in with this little, you guys know what Sharper Image is? Do you remember the Sharper Image store for some of the older people? That was like the coolest store of gadgets ever. Yeah, it really was. And so I felt like I had a Sharper Image device that I would walk into these storefronts and say, hey, do you want to, connect with your customers via text and allow them to order? And they're kind of scratching their head and they're like, I'm not following you. And so I pulled out this little device from my backpack, put it on the table, and said, do you want to avoid war? And they're like, what's war? And I'd be like, that's called walk-away revenue. And I watched 3 people walk out this door that if they had seen the line, they would have walked out, and you could have saved them by allowing them to text their order. And the light bulb went off. They're like, yeah, I want to avoid war.
Right.
And that's the use case that I solved. It was the only use case that texting made sense at the time. And we just started there, and we were really good about listening to the marketplace, and it evolved. And we went from food to parking. If you ever text for your car to valet, you're probably using Zingle and you didn't know it.
Right.
And then from there, we evolved when the CIO of Four Seasons called me up and said, Ford, we have all these hotel guests that are texting for their cars, and we're getting all these positive comments back. You should evolve this to a hospitality platform where people can text for their towels, their drinks poolside, late checkout. And I was like, man, I want that.
Right.
And so that's when I went and started evolving the hospitality platform. So,
how did you get the name Zingle?
I do love this story, but it's a lot of people are going to laugh at it because there's like some twists and turns to it. But everybody knows the story of Google, right? And I was very intentional because texting to business I knew was going to be a thing. And I felt like I had first time to market that I wanted to invent and own the word like Kleenex, like Google. And so I wanted to come up with a word that was both a noun and a verb. And from a branding perspective, obviously my sister sort of knows how to brand. She's the best at it. And so that was really important to come up with an intentional word that could be assigned to it. And so at the time, this is 2008, domain names were really hard to get, specifically .com. Now there's like every domain you can get under the sun. And so there was a finite number of domains that you could get. And so I whittled it down to 2 that were readily available. And the first was Zombie, which sounds fast. It also sounds like a vacuum cleaner.
Yes.
But the problem with it is you hear it at a cocktail party, and phonetically, there's like 12 different spellings for it. And so you really want something like, that's the beauty of Google, right? You know how to spell it. Zombie, I think I counted like 7 different spellings if you were to go back and look for it. Yeah. The other one was called Dingle. And that's the one that I could get the domain, and it was a noun and a verb, and I liked it because it had a little bit of like jingle and ringle to it. But everybody did exactly what you did, is they laughed, and they're thinking the stuff that you don't want to know about. And I went to my sister, and I said, Sarah, I go, Zombie or Dingle? She's like, Dingle. Go Dingle, because it makes everybody laugh, and it's memorable. Yeah. And I remember coming back going, shit, I can't do a company called Dingle. Like, if I'm ever a huge success, and I'm going to be made fun of by David Letterman someplace, somehow. And it immediately clicked with me that I think the Z from Zombie was kind of catchy, but I liked the Ingle because you could spell it, you knew how to do it, and it was memorable, and I could get the domain. So very, very intentional, and I think kind of fun too.
Yeah. How did you grow the company to the point where you decided to make that sale? How did you make that decision?
I'd love to think I was smart enough to kind of figure out how that trajectory went, and I think I wasn't. I think any entrepreneur that tells you they can kind of see that path and direction, they're probably not crystal clear. But for me, I just had the mission of solving the weight. And I had multiple opportunities to go deep into a parking POS, go deep into a restaurant POS, but I really wanted to solve this communication layer problem where things got better faster. And for me, there was really 2 different parts of my business. There was the first stage, which I call heavy headwinds, where I bootstrapped it all, took in very little money, and pounded on doors. People didn't believe in the idea. And this is what I was telling you, is I think if I was to write a blog, I'd call it staying power, because that's sort of what makes me think of how things should work, because I think I had the staying power to kind of last through those trends. Because for me, when things became headwinds to tailwinds, was when Facebook realized that Facebook Messenger was a better tool to connect with businesses than it was consumers. And it happened to be on the forefront of sort of being the kid out of California that was believing in texting to business. And we were selected as one of Facebook's first 30 partners. We were on the stage of F8. It was a big deal. This was like 2014. And so once influencers like Zuckerberg and Mary Meeker come out and say messaging is now the new form of business communication, everyone's like, right. And so we were the right place at the right time, and then things really moved quickly, and we got a lot of interest from, big brands and, venture capital. But to answer your question on like what happened to that evolution is, I think it's okay to not have the crystal clear view on where it goes. You just want to evolve. You want to continue to grow your team. You want to continue to grow your mission. I decided it was a good time to sell because I felt that what I had started and created, like I had sort of fulfilled that mission in terms of what I felt like I was good at. And I realized the next frontier of messaging was going to be data analytics. And so I was solving the request problem. Like, how do you get people to get towels faster? How do you get them to do this? And the company that bought us is a public company called Medallia. If you've ever filled out a survey from Delta, Avis, Bank of America, they have all this natural language processing, data scientists, like hundreds of data scientists that are analyzing how to look at unstructured data. And I recognized that messaging wasn't just going to be a great customer experience platform, but is also going to be, I think, the most important vehicle for customer data on the planet.
Yes, yeah.
Because at the time, Medallia is collecting all their data through email surveys. I've never filled out a Medallia survey personally, but I think if you look at analyzing messaging threads and voice threads, like that's really how you get the 360-degree view. And so they approached us, they approached me, and I remember having the meeting, and then kind of made them be kind of the old Blockbuster, like why you guys are old school. And I think they acknowledged the old school, and I think that's what was great for me, is like they obviously had a progressive view of what they wanted to become, and I felt that the data analytics side was not a side I had core competency on, nor the resources to scale it up as fast as I could, and so that's what excited me. Yeah. Like it was, yes, money's great, but it was the sort of the collaboration of helping the product that I started in my garage evolve to where it is.
Going forward, what are you working on with them?
So I stayed on as a general manager. I oversee all the messaging, components, both Zingle and they have other products that do messaging. And that's basically, my core initiatives is to make sure that we execute on that original mission. Like, how do we leverage messaging, not just as a customer service tool, but really provide those analytics? So I spent a lot of time on product integrations and look at the sentiment temperatures and how do you do that effectively without, breaking the customer chain of reliance. On the side, I'm now joining a venture capital firm as a operating partner. So I get the most passion out of helping other entrepreneurs. Yeah. Like I sort of spend half my time, with the core component, but then another huge component helping others. I think that's the part. And what I'm passionate about is, I think, beating down those stories of how easy it is to build a company. Because I think so many people struggle. I mean, I had probably 99 reasons to quit.
Yeah. What is the worst piece of advice that either you gave Sarah or she gave you, or both?
Well, that's easy. The worst piece of advice she told me is name my company Dingle. Right. I don't think Furman would have put me on the thing if my company was called Dingle, right? Am I right? And you'd have to ask her. I feel like I've probably given her really bad advice, but we work together. I mean, I'm on her board, and she helps me, and I think it's actually helpful to have that perspective because she comes at it from a sales and marketing perspective. I come at things from an analytical perspective, but she'd probably tell you something as a kid. Right. Was my worst advice.
You told her to stick her finger in the light socket.
Yeah.
Or something. Right.
I'll add one more answer to that, because I thought the question you were going to ask is, what is the worst piece of advice you think you hear commonly in the entrepreneur community? Yeah. And I'm pretty passionate about it, but I actually don't like the commentary around fail fast. Mm-hmm.
Why not?
Because I think it sets the expectations to founders that when the going gets tough, they have a reason to quit. And I know my journey, like I told you, I had 99 times I probably would have quit, should have quit, didn't quit. And my sister would say the same thing. Like, business is not easy, and so those, I think, that are giving people the mentality that it's okay to quit and shift, I think it's the entrepreneurs that succeed that punch through that layer of resistance that they feel.
Is quitting and failure the same thing?
No. I think we fail every day, right?
Explain that.
Failing is about trying things, and I think, my dad in high school used to tell my sister and I, like, go find something to fail. And it was about teaching resistance to things not going your way.
Not your math class.
Yeah, not my math class. But when I was a high school kid, I was like 93 pounds and 5'2", and I went and signed up for football, and I got cut immediately. So there's just a lot of angles there that I think sort of teaches, failing is okay, but quitting feels different to me. Yeah. I'll have to sort of dissect where that's different. You probably have a perspective on that, but
I want to hear yours.
Quitting, I don't have it formalized. This is a good question, but to me, when I hear the word quitting, I feel like you're quitting on the people that believe in you. Like, I had my first employee, I didn't want to quit because I feel like I was quitting their confidence and their belief in me. Yeah. I didn't want to quit because I felt like the customers, and so I feel like you fail every day when you've got a problem and you figure out how to solve it and you figure out the next move around it. Right. But quitting feels to me like you're just done.
Throwing in the towel.
Done, and you're completely on something else. So I would feel like quitting would be the end result of too many failures that you just can't handle anymore.
Right. How has being an entrepreneur and living the life that you've led affected you as a parent?
It's interesting because you asked me what did my parents do growing up, and I think they gave us a lot of free space. The one thing that I probably would have liked to see more of is just a little bit more of that parental coaching to help sort of extract what you're really good at. It took me longer in life to figure out that I was a problem solver, that was an introvert, and how does the introvert actually become a strength? Like, I think, don't underestimate the introvert. I think they're probably the most talented people out there. I think it's how do they harness that to a way that they can use that weakness as a strength. Right. So as I look at my children, I really spend a lot of time trying to find what I think their passions are, because I found my passion later in life, and I think as a parent I really want them to find that passion early on in life and give them encouragement to go execute on that. Yeah.
Excellent. I love that answer. What's next for you?
I think I gave you a little bit of hint to that. I think at the end of the day, I love solving problems, and I think that can manifest itself into me starting another company of a problem that is in my notebook. But as I've started to sort of have a little bit more time away from running the business, I'm connecting with more entrepreneurs, and I'm having a lot of fun counseling and advising startups. I advise a lot of startups now just sort of directly, and as I told you, I'm joining this venture capital firm to kind of help. And so that's feeding my problem-solving component. So that's where I'm going to go with it. I don't think I have to have it completely dialed in, but I love solving problems, and whether that definitely manifests itself either in doing it full-time, helping others, or doing it again on my own.
Right. So let's take a look at your book. And I want you to pick 2 ideas from your book that you think you might push forward.
Do we have NDAs in place?
Be vague if you need to.
Yeah, so I'll give you some of the old ones.
Okay.
Because, and it's fun. Like, I love the fact that you've got people you tell to the sketchbook, because it is a lot of fun, and you have the drawings. I have sort of 2. I'll give you 2. One of them, I'm sure this must have been existed, but this was in 2008. And I had my first child in 2015. And for those of you that have children or, have nieces or nephews with children. Like when you feed your child, it looks like a tornado has gone on around you. And so I invented this sort of like this upside down umbrella around, like it was like a poppin that sat inside of a high chair so that it kind of collected the tornado of food that went everywhere, and then you folded it up and you could wash it and throw it away. Like, I think that idea exists now, but that was something I had no idea what to do. The other one is actually one that I still have, and it's fairly dormant, but I felt like the men's dress shirt was really antiquated. Like, it hasn't really evolved, and I was an accountant, and by trade, I would kind of button up my top button up here during work, and then I'd go meet my wife for dinner, and she's like, you look like a nerd with this thing way up here. And so I felt like men's fashion needed versatility, needed flexibility. And so I wrote in my book, actually I have patents on this, where I reinvented the top buttons of the men's dress shirt, where I actually hid a third button in between so you had the option. And I called it the smart button. And I actually named the buttons. I said this was the work button. The middle button that was hidden was the date night button. And the bottom button was Las Vegas, where you went big.
All right, somebody's going to pick that one up.
Yeah. I got patents on it, though, so be careful.
Let's talk about the patents. How many patents do you have? I
got a decent amount. I'd say at least 5.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah.
All in the same elements of solving a problem. I love to surf. I grew up surfing in Florida, and I have patents around surfboards and crazy stuff. And
they're all just things you thought of because there was a problem.
Yeah, and it's all stemmed from the book. And like I said, I think the fact that my dyslexia was probably made me work harder and study harder at Furman, but it actually was a blessing because it made me think about things differently. Yeah. And had I not sort of taken the energy to solve for those problems, I don't know what would have happened. I probably would have taken that job with the accounting group.
You probably would have. And I think what you said about in the quiet times, those ideas come to you is extremely apropos for all of you guys, because my best ideas come when I'm meditating, right? When I shut the world out and I'm thinking of nothing. And then all of a sudden this great idea pops into my head.
Yeah. My meditation is driving. I like to drive by myself in my car. My sister actually does the same thing, but I used to have a 20-minute commute to work, and I kept thinking to myself, thank God I don't have a 5-minute commute. Yeah. Because it's like that quiet time, and you think about things, but yeah.
Right. All right, I think we want to open it up to questions from the audience now.
When you went through the process of hiring your first employee, or however many employees you hired, like what did you look for in an employee, and how did you decide whether they were going to be a good fit for your company?
Yeah, good question. Every employee, obviously, the first employee that I hired was sales, because I was scared deeply of going and doing sales. And so I think the most important thing is, are they passionate about what you are and what you're solving? Because I think as a startup, you don't have a lot of money to pay. I think I compensated this individual with a lot of Starbucks cards. And so he believed in the mission, he believed in what we were doing, and that mattered a lot to me. And so I think, finding someone who's willing to take a little bit of a pay cut to come sort of solve your problem is important. When you get that question can have a bunch of different answers in terms of what's the skill set, like what do you look for in sales, what do you look for in finance, what do you look for in marketing. And the reality is the needs evolve over the course of time. Like what my needs were when I was just me and one other person were dramatically different than when we got, when we had 75 employees and I needed people to learn how to scale and grow and look at data and metrics.
What are your needs now?
I'll keep the answer broadly. I want entrepreneurs. I care less about what your skill set is. I care more about how you're wired. Yeah. Because I used to say, look, we are going up against the bigs, the Goliaths. And the Goliaths think slow. They think, you guys remember the whole Apple versus IBM commercial, and that's true. The big companies don't have that ability to be nimble and fast and think things differently. And so the number one thing I had to have is I wanted someone who wasn't afraid to kind of tell me their idea. And if we had someone who came in accounts payable, maybe felt like they didn't have the voice, I'd say, I want you to come with ideas. And so we would have monthly meetings where, even if it wasn't even related to accounts payable, I wanted to hear what their ideas were. Right. Because that's how we kept our culture pretty creative in terms of what they do. So that's what I would say. I mean, it's, there's no perfect fit and size. I think attitude and creativity and being sort of spirited to kind of have a voice and speak up for that is probably what every employer is looking for now. And if that's not what they're looking for, then I would arguably say you don't want to work for that company anyways.
On the venture capital side, what excites you most right now? It's a great time to be in VC.
I really like the supply chain that's coming up and out. I mean, obviously, I think in every world, we're all seeing the issues in automotive, the issues in home building. There's a lot of, I think, opportunity in supply chain to help evolve that. And I think I get excited about specific verticals that don't have the focus. I think you look at chiropractic, you look at dental, you look at different things. Like there's a lot of cool little elements where those verticals haven't had a lot of opportunity for advancement. And so I like that.
I think COVID really affected supply chain incredibly. How did it affect you guys?
COVID was scary for the first 2 months. Mm-hmm. I'd say everything was paralyzed, and I think if you think about the largest sector of our business was hospitality. Right. And hospitality came to a screeching halt. Yeah. But what ultimately ended up happening was people recognized that messaging and texting was probably the best use of a contactless engagement. And what felt to be one of our scariest years was actually one of our best years. So 2020 was a great year, mainly because I think hotels and brands recognized that they could still facilitate great hotel experiences with a personal touch, but at a pretty good distance apart. Right. And so we had hoteliers that were servicing their hotel guests even from their own homes. We actually powered, the New York City outbreak. So the Intercontinental Times Square was the epicenter of the outbreak and the early sort of part of it. And that's where all the first responders went. So all the nurses, doctors, Red Cross, basically that hotel was dedicated to that. Mm-hmm. And Zingle was basically powering all those communications. So we saw like all these doctors and nurses saying, hey, can we get this and that? And it was all done at a safe distance. Mm-hmm. And that was a really good that felt like good. Sometimes an entrepreneur, you don't always see the good moments, but when you see yourself kind of providing a tech that wasn't built for that, being used in a really good way, it felt pretty good.
Yeah, that's very cool. I was wondering how you've responded to criticism and rejection in the past, and what you would say is the most advantageous way to handle that.
You're going to get it. You're going to get criticism and pushback. I don't care if you're Mark Zuckerberg. He had criticism. I think it's just being prepared for it. I always say, sometimes I'll go into a meeting assuming that stuff's going to go really bad, just so that I'm not disappointed when it does. But then when it goes really well, you're like pumping your chest out. You're like, I got this, and things are going really well. The most important thing I just would say is just absorb it, but don't let it sort of derail you. And definitely don't sort of fire back with any kind of, angst, if you will. I think, business is a pretty small community. Whether you be in Greenville or San Diego or New York City, there's been times where I got beat up and I kind of, for my own therapy, maybe this is like a good little lesson, is I would write out an email to the individual, never send it, keep it a draft. And I think just like the writing of that out was therapeutic to me, but I knew that if I ever sent that was out there and I'd have that area of concern. I can remember one email. I think it was not the Four Seasons. Yes, it was the Four Seasons. That we launched a pilot. They never went anywhere with it. They had some criticism for us, and I wrote a really long kind of email like, "You guys weren't engaged." This is recorded, right? So.
Only a few.
Yeah.
People are gonna...
But my point is, I never sent it, and had I sent it, it probably would have changed the trajectory. And then 4 months later, they called me up and they said, Ford, we've got our stuff together. We want to redeploy this. thank you for being patient with us. And it was amazing that I did that. So hopefully that's a helpful tip. And I think you feel things, you feel rejection, you feel that disappointment, and so it's best to figure out a way to internalize that. But that was my practice, is just never send it.
If you could go back to your senior year at Furman, what would you do differently, and what advice would you give a senior or junior at Furman looking to be an entrepreneur and starting a business?
Great question. So I think with the program that's in place now, like, I would soak it up. I would be part of everything that you possibly can. Like, take as many meetings as you can. I would actively hit up Anthony and the team to talk to entrepreneurs in the community, get their feedback. I mean, I was telling Rusty that one of the things I was sort of deciding is like what major I was going to go into. So I interviewed CEOs, and they told me accounting. So really leverage that network to figure out where to go. I would do a lot of internal writing to figure out what you think you're really good at and what you're passionate about. And I would come to those meetings and sort of use that group as a testing stick to see what they think, and I think that will help you evolve to what you're doing. And I would look for, coming back to what is great about Furman is it's small, it's safe, you've got the opportunity of really engaging in testing, and I would try to put yourself in some uncomfortable situations. If you're nervous pitching, talk to your friends and say, hey, let me go do a practice pitch. Or if you're nervous about how to create PowerPoint, this is your safe place where you can kind of test the uniqueness of what you do. Because once you're on the business community, it's tougher to do that, and this community will help sort of be your catalyst to help you improve that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we talk to students all the time about, is now is the time to start trying these things.
Yeah, I mean, I would just drink from the fire hose and do as much of that as you can and almost annoy people.
Thank you so much. Yeah. It's such a great conversation. We appreciate you being here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
And as always, thank you so much for choosing the Class E podcast. Before I let you go, a big announcement. Now you have 2 ways to soak up the information and discussions shared in the Class E podcast. We've launched the Class E podcast YouTube channel. So check that out and watch our episodes there, or of course you can find the audio version wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, watch out for our brand new short segments coming soon, Everyday Entrepreneur. Learn in brief how everyday people become entrepreneurs as they share their stories with us. The Hill Institute is excited to announce another packed cohort of 25 aspiring entrepreneurs for the Greenville Starts program. This is an 8-week experience put on in partnership with the City of Greenville, South Carolina Department of Commerce, and SCRA that delivers the training, connections, and access to capital for startups of all types who are launching or growing their ventures in Greenville, South Carolina. If this program sounds like something you or a friend might be interested in or want to apply, simply Google Greenville Starts. Remember, the Class E podcast is made possible through a partnership between the Hill Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and the Communication Studies Department here at Furman University. This episode is produced by students Emma Kerr and Eliza Polich. I'm your host, Mary Sturgill. Until next time, dream big, everybody.